The Earth's crust has given up from time to time evidence enough to establish our remote ancestors in various parts of the Earth during the latter part of the Pleistocene or glacial period, perhaps as early as half a million years ago. The Java skulls, the Peking man, the Rhodesian man, the Neanderthal man, found literally all over the four corners of the earth, show that men occupied most of the eastern hemisphere in very early times. The first three of these different species of men lived during the second interglacial period in Asia or Africa, but Neanderthal man lived in Europe during the third interglacial and fourth glacial periods. The study of our remote predecessors is a fascinating subject, but a brief account of Neanderthal man will suffice to picture the tens of thousands of years during which early man roamed the earth. The first Neanderthal skull to be discovered was found at Gibraltar in 1848 and attracted scant attention. Since that time, more than 66 skeletons of this type have been unearthed in Europe and Asia. As reconstructed by modern anthropologists, the Neanderthal men were short, males being about 5 feet 3 inches in height and females somewhat shorter. Their posture was slouching, their necks short and immensely muscular, their faces and heads were thrust forward and they were heavily muscled. They must have been powerful brutes. They were the cavemen of today's cartoonists. The fourth glacial advance drove Neanderthal men to seek shelter in caves, and there we find the best preserved remains of their culture. Caves in France have supplied us with their tools: fist hatchets, fillet knives, scrapers, and borers. Also in these caves, archaeologists have occasionally found human skeletons which seem to have been laid out carefully for burial. The tools buried carefully with the bodies are strong evidence that Neanderthal man expected to use them in the next world, which would indicate the influence of religion and a belief in some sort of immortality. The Neanderthal men dominated Europe for at least 100,000 years and were replaced by a faster learning man whom we now know as Cro-Magnon man. The Cro-Magnon man are what anthropologists generally apply the name Homo sapiens to. This new species, which probably entered Europe from southwestern Asia by way of northern Africa. By about 10,000 BC, the Cro-Magnons had developed a culture which far surpassed that of their Neanderthal predecessors. They were hunters, especially fond of pursuing the wild horse and reindeer. Near one site is a refuse dump of horse bones which, it has been estimated, contains the bones of 100,000 animals. As the climate of Europe was still cold, men usually lived in caves, though they learned to fashion rude shelters of skins and tree branches. They showed greatly improved technique in chipping flint, and they made tools of bone or reindeer horn. At this time, moreover, the bow and arrow first appeared. Several cave paintings show hunters using these weapons. One broken carving seems to show a man in the act of drawing a bow, and small flints have been found that might well have been arrowheads. The disappearance of the Neanderthal man and the rapid victory of the Cro-Magnon may have been due to a large part to this superior weapon. The crowning glory of the Cro-Magnons was their art. Whereas Neanderthal man apparently had little artistic feeling, his successors everywhere showed high talents in this direction. Personal adornment was profuse, necklaces were made of shells or teeth of animals, elaborate headdresses were worn, and bodies were painted. Men decorated the walls of their caves with drawings and made small statues of men and animals. The realistic paintings of horses, deer, bison, reindeer, bear, and fish, which have been found in caves in northern Spain and southern France, are now world famous. The walls of caves were also decorated with bas reliefs, and the skill shown by these Cro-Magnon artists is amazing. Their art presently went into decline, however, and thousands of years were to pass before the appearance of elsewhere of art of comparable distinction. We naturally ask why these works of art were made. Some of them perhaps possessed only aesthetic value, others probably were connected with magic. The paintings were usually found in the darkest recesses of caves, which were where the aesthetic qualities could hardly be appreciated, but where magic ceremonies could have taken place before or during the hunt. Perhaps men believed that repeating prayers and incantations before such pictures would make their hunting more fruitful or protect them from the fury of the hunted. The Cro-Magnons also had religious beliefs of a sort. They buried their dead in an elaborate and formal manner. The bodies were covered with red ochre, and weapons and useful tools as well as necklaces and their ornaments were buried with them. Such practices indicate belief in a future life. Perhaps some of the statues were idols rather than fetishes, and some of the cave paintings depict dances or rituals which presumably had religious significance. Moreover, the existence of magic seems to imply the previous existence of religion, for the idea of spirits and supernatural powers is fundamentally religious and is born of religious experience. Even in the dim light of prehistory, it was evident that progress was not a fundamental part of natural law. Presently, life became more difficult and the Cro-Magnons' marvelous abilities fell into decline. The climate of Western Europe was growing warmer, and the moisture-laden winds once deflected southwards until they watered and fertilized the Sahara began to flow across Europe. The broad European grasslands were overgrown with forest, first of pine and later of oak, and the great herds of reindeer and bison that had once roamed the plains gradually disappeared. The men who had lived by hunting these animals were forced to supplement their meat diet with shellfish. The places of the habitation are today marked by middens, which are hillocks composed of thousands of cubic yards of discarded shells, among which have been found a few stone implements as well as bones of animals and men. As these enormous middens are the refuse of centuries, the population of Europe must have been meager in those days, and the degenerative Cro-Magnons must have led miserable, half-starved existences. Europe thus fell back into darkness after the brilliant achievements of the Cro-Magnons. But during these millenniums of darkness in Western Europe, new and fundamental discoveries were being made in the part of the world known as the Near East. These discoveries eventually freed man from dependence upon chance for finding food and effected what has aptly been termed the Neolithic Revolution.